In this next series of lecture videos, we're going to talk about the kingdom fungi. Many ways of saying it: fungi, fungi, fungi. So all of them are good ways and proper ways of saying. There are just no one single right way. This is an extremely interesting group of organisms because it comprises a very unique kingdom. It's very overlooked. I could spend I don't know, a whole semester just talking about fungi because I find them fascinating. But I'm going to give you an overview of the group and a little bit about their morphology and major phyla that comprise this kingdom. It is an extremely diverse kingdom, as you can see in this picture right here. There are around 100,000 species identified. This is quite a bit. But the interesting number for me is that even though there are 100,000 different species identified, is that scientists believe that there are 5 million species out there. What's fascinating and exciting, I guess, to me, is to look at the difference between these two numbers. Scientists believe that there are 5 million different species of fungi out there, but we have only found 100,000. Why? Why such a discrepancy between these two numbers? If they're so abundant, if there are so many different species out there, why haven't we found a substantial portion of them? 100,000 is very, very little if there are indeed 5 million species out there. In order to understand why we know so little, I'm going to tell you just this little, very short story. When I went to the Amazon for the first time, I was 20 years old. I was very young and very excited about things and worked hard. And I was working in the forest. I worked both in a pristine primary forest, but also in a secondary forest. So a forest that had an area of the forest that had been cut and used for pasture, and then it was abandoned and left to regenerate. One day I was working in the forest, in the primary forest, and deep, deep, deep in there. And I get to one of my sites and I encountered this fungus right here, in this picture. This picture is not mine, as you can see, but this was it. And I had never seen something so pretty. I was just amazed and fascinated. And I thought I was in a little fairy story. That's the feeling I had. It was like magical. And I saw this. And this is like the picture is showing it big, but it's maybe like a 6 to 8 inch tall fungus. And I was just so amazed. And I didn't have a camera, of course, because you see the best things when you don't have a camera on you. There was nobody next to me to share that experience. So later in the day, a couple hours later, more or less, like 2-3 hours later in that day, I brought someone. I called someone and I said, "You have to come and see this. This is so pretty. This is so magical. This is so great." And when we got there, it was gone. Gone. Just a couple hours later. And then I was sure it was magic. Like it was like how it was something about that forest. I didn't know much about fungi then. What I know now, this is a very common thing to happen, which is this part here of the fungus that I'm seeing and I saw at that time is just the reproductive part. It's a part of the fungus that we call the fruiting body. And it would be equivalent to an apple on an apple tree. Okay, just the fruit. The real fungus is underground. It's inside of the ground. These fruiting bodies, these structures that we know as mushrooms for some fungi, they are very, very temporary. They're just put out by the fungus to produce spores, spread them, and once those spores are spread, that whole structure is going to degrade and disappear. And they do that very fast. If you buy mushrooms to eat, if you like to eat fresh mushrooms, you buy them, they're not going to last a week in a refrigerator. They're going to last a couple of days and they're going to start looking brown and they are going to decompose really, really fast. And that's what happens to these fruiting bodies. So the reason why we don't know much about fungi is that we usually find them when we see their reproductive structures. Most of the time, they're not putting out a reproductive structure. So we miss them. And when they put out some of these fungi, when they put those structures, this structure may last like an hour, 2 hours, like the one of my story, and they disappear. So the chances that a scientist is going to catch it and be able to collect and identify is very, very small. Nowadays, scientists use DNA technology in order to identify those fungi so they can collect samples of soil and then they can sequence all the DNA that they find in that soil. And then through that, they can estimate how many species are there and try to find species. So I believe that we are going to find more and more fungi now. For you to have an idea, the average number of species of fungi that we describe each year is around 1,000. That's huge. You're describing 1,000 new species of fungi per year. So extremely fascinating group. The reason why we don't know much is because we don't see the body of the fungus, really. So the first thing I want you guys to understand about fungi is their body. And their body, the whole body, is called a mycelium. This word right here, the term myco refers to fungi. So a scientist who studies fungi is called a mycologist, and the body is a mycelium. And the mycelium is made of these individual thread-like structures that you're seeing here as these white lines in this diagram. You can see these threads in this picture right here. These brown things are mulch, and you're seeing these threads which is kind of amplified and magnified here. And each of these threads is called a hypha. Hypha and hyphae here is written in the plural, which is hyphae. So when these fungi reproduce sexually, they are going to produce this body here, this above ground body. Not all of them, some of them will produce it on the ground, which makes it even harder to find them. But most of them are going to produce a fruiting body, which is a spore producing structure above the ground. It's also made of these hyphae, but it kind of looks more solid. But truth is that if you would kind of get a little piece of this mushroom here and you put it under the microscope, you see that it's made of threads. It's not made of tissues like the body of an animal. And these fruiting bodies are very temporary, as I mentioned before, and their job is to produce spores. So if you look at a mushroom, like this is being represented here in this diagram, the spores are produced underneath the cap. If you think of the cap of the mushroom and you turn it upside down, you see those brown lines. Those brown lines are called gills, and on those gills, there are the spore-producing sporangia or structures, and once those spores mature, they're going to be released and they're going to be spread by wind or animals that eat those mushrooms, and then that fruiting body, that reproductive structure, is going to be gone very quickly. Look at the picture and identify structures A, B, and C.